Bienvenidos otra vez and welcome back to our third episode of the Spanish lesson series, where we go through basic Spanish beginner lessons all the way working up to our more intermediate and even possibly advanced style lessons. Today we got a great episode for you. We're going to be talking about how to ask someone what their name is while also responding to this, about someone's nationality, where are they from, responding to that question as well, and finally we're going to be talking about how to talk about your career. What we can ask someone about, where do you work, what's your career, but also, once again, responding to that prompt. So it's going to be a very interesting episode. We have 3 different questions that we're going to be talking about, very common questions about who you are as a person. But we also have those responses too. We're going to talk about not only how to ask this to someone, but what if someone were to ask that to you? That's what we're going to be covering, how to answer all 3 questions as well as ask them. Really excited for today's episode. If you haven't already, make sure to follow our podcast if you do enjoy it. Also, if you really enjoyed this episode, give it a thumbs up on whatever platform you are watching from. And if you haven't already, make sure to check out some of our other series here on the podcast. We have Las Noticias Diarias, which is where we go over news stories every single podcast, with more advanced grammar and rhetoric, so you can more readily improve your comprehension of the language and your listening abilities while learning new words and also learning more about what is happening in the world. We also have Hora de Cantar, which is where we look at a Spanish song every single episode, breaking it down line by line so we can not only understand the song, but once again grow in our comprehension and understanding of the language. And really with these podcasts, we're able to not only understand more words, but really find and look at the language and understand it in a way so when we begin to interpret and speak the language, we're able to use these phrases which make us sound more natural and more like a native. But without further ado, let's get into our 3rd episode of the Spanish lesson series, talking about our name, our nationality, and our career. Vamos. Alright, awesome. So our first topic we're going to be covering here today is going to be about our name. How to ask someone, what's your name, and also how we can respond to that. So, the question to say, what is your name in Spanish, is going to be, ¿Cómo te llamas? ¿Cómo te llamas? Right? And this is going to be in that to form. That's going to be the more informal way. If you wanted to say, what is your name, with more of a formal tone, with more respect, it would be, ¿Cómo se llama? ¿Cómo se llama? So that is going to be the primary way to ask someone what is their name. Right? Once again, that's ¿Cómo te llamas? For a more informal tone using that to form, or ¿Cómo se llama? Right? For a more informal, for a more formal tone, addressing someone out of respect. Now, there is also another way you could ask this. It is much less common. You probably wouldn't hear anyone say this, but there's also a way you could say, ¿Cuál es tu nombre? That is another way to ask, what is your name? But if you're out and about and you're hearing Spanish, most often you're going to hear, ¿Cómo te llamas? Or ¿Cómo se llama? You may hear, ¿Cuál es tu nombre? But principally, it's going to be those first 2. Now, how do we respond to this? What if someone were to ask us, ¿Cómo te llamas? Right? How would we be able to respond to this? Well, once again, there's 2 different ways to say this. One of them is going to be much more common, and that is going to be saying, me llamo, in this case, William. Right? So we have me llamo and then our name. Because in this episode, we're dealing with the verb llamarse, which is to call oneself like a name. Because llamar is like to call someone like this, to call different things like that. But with llamarse, right, you probably notice we have te llamas, se llama, right? That's going to be a reflexive verb once again. Similar to our last episode, we had sentirse. It's really along those same lines here. But because we're saying me llamo William, I'm saying I call myself William. But in Spanish, it's just simply translating to that's my name, right? Even though the direct translation would be Me llamo William, I call myself William. So that is why we have those different forms of llamarse, right? If I were to say your name, it would be como te llamas. How do you call yourself is essentially what's it saying. And same thing with se llama. That could be with her name, his name, but remember when we're dealing with usted, which is that formal you, it's going to have that same conjugation and reflexive pronoun as él and ella, so usted would be se llama. Now, there is also one more way to say my name is. Once again, this is not as common. You would most likely want to use me llamo, but you could say mi nombre es. So, mi nombre es William. But, like I said, most often, more than not, you're going to hear me llamo William. But, so you have two ways we can ask someone their name, and we have como te llamas, or como se llama, or we have cuál es tu nombre. But remember, those first two are going to be much more common, and that is what I would use when I'm asking someone their name. Then, right, if someone were to ask us that same question, someone would come up to me and say, ¿Cómo te llamas? I would say, Me llamo William. Or, very rarely, but you could also say, Mi nombre es William. But out of native speakers, you're going to hear more often, Me llamo, and then the name. Alright, perfect. So moving on, we're now going to be dealing with our nationality. So there's, once again, we have a question that is very common to be asked and how we're going to respond to this. So these next two sections, not only nationality, but also when talking about our job or career, we're going to be using a lot the verb ser, which is probably the most used verb in the entire language because it's our verb to be. Because remember, a star is going to be used for feelings, emotions, and where you geographic location. So, for instance, to ask someone where are they from, it would be ¿De dónde eres? Right? Of where, ¿de dónde eres? Are you from? And once again, we have a more formal way to say this. It'd be ¿De dónde es usted? Right? Where are you from? Once again, but with that more formal tone in it. So that is going to be the way to ask someone, about their nationality. Where are you from? ¿De dónde eres? ¿De dónde es usted? But remember, we also have a way to respond to that. How would we respond to that? Someone were to ask, ¿De dónde eres? You would use the yo form of ser, because I forgot to mention when we're asking someone, ¿De dónde eres? Eres is that to form of the verb ser. So, ¿De dónde eres? Where are you from? And in the usted form, it changes to es. That ser stem is going to be changing to es. So, ¿De dónde es usted? Now, when we're responding, we're going to want to use the yo form, which is I, me. So, I would say ser in the yo form is soy. So, you would say soy de and your location. So, soy de los Estados Unidos. I am from the United States. Soy de los Estados Unidos. Or you could say soy de España. I am from Spain. Soy de Mexico. I'm from Mexico. So you're going to have that soy and then de is of. So basically, once again, these first two aren't going to be, if you directly translate it, it doesn't make sense in English. But if you think about it, right, we have soy de I am from, or I am of, and then the geographic place, Mexico, Spain. So, soy de los Estados Unidos, soy de Mexico. That is how you would respond to that question of ¿De dónde eres? So now we have our final topic that we're going to touch on today, which is going to be careers. And the reason I touch on this with our name and nationality, especially with where we're from, is because once again, we're going to be using ser as a verb. So when someone were to ask you about their job, the most probable, the most likely question is going to be, ¿En qué trabajas? Right? Our verb, so what do you work in? So trabajar is our verb for to work. So trabajar, and once again, they're using that would be a casual way to ask, ¿En qué trabajas? Right? In what do you work? Right? What do you do for work? ¿En qué trabajas? In what trabajas? You work. So right, we have en qué trabajas. This is the way I'd say, what do you do for work? What do you do for a living? That's what most likely people will ask you. But, right, when we're talking about our career, you would say, if someone asks you, what do you do for a living? In English, you'd say, right now I'd say I'm a student or I'm a teacher. So we're once again going to be using that verb ser. So how we would say that, you would say, I am, let's say, a student. I would say, soy estudiante. Soy estudiante. Now, it's interesting here, in English we would say, I am a student. And it would make sense, right? You would think in Spanish you would say, soy un estudiante, right? I am a student. But a particular rule here in Spanish, when we're talking about careers, we won't use that un to say a student. It would be just simply soy estudiante or soy médico. I'm a doctor. Soy profesor. I'm a professor. And so once again, our question is going to be ¿En qué trabajas? That's just a very casual, easy way to say, what do you work? What do you do for a living? What do you work in? And we would respond with soy maestro. I am a teacher. Soy abogado. I am a lawyer. There's all different types. Whatever your career is, you may use that, and you can simply say soy profesor. Soy estudiante. All these different things would work perfectly, but remember we're going to use, that is the yo form of ser, so soy, I am, and then you would follow with your career path. Now there are many other ways to describe what you work in, more advanced phrases, but this, for the basics, would work perfectly fine if someone were to say, ¿En qué trabajas? You would say, soy estudiante, and that would be perfectly fine. We are going to touch on those more articulate, more advanced ways to say things like that, but in this video, in this episode, that is going to work perfectly fine. Alright, so that about wraps up all the content that we are getting into in today's episode, episode 3 of our Spanish lessons series. We went over how to ask someone their name. ¿Cómo te llamas? Or ¿Cómo se llama? Me llamo William. We also learned how to ask someone where they're from. ¿De dónde eres? ¿De dónde es usted? Soy de los Estados Unidos. Soy de México. And finally, we learned how to ask someone what they do for a living. What is their job? ¿En qué trabajas? ¿En qué trabajas? And we now know how to respond. We could say, soy profesor. Or soy médico. I am a professor. I am a doctor. Alright, perfect. I hope this lesson has been helpful for today, continuing with the Spanish lesson series, working step by step, learn new functions of the language every single day. We can strive to improve our Spanish proficiency every single day. I hope that you will continue to join us on this journey from more beginner lessons all the way working up to more intermediate and advanced level lessons. If you guys did enjoy today's episode and the podcast in general, make sure to give us a like and hit that follow button. That really does support us in producing more episodes daily, Spanish lesson series, but also in our other series, like Leer con Propósito or Hora de Cantar, similar to what I had talked to in the beginning of our episode. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in to today's lesson. It truly does mean the world. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Continue to learn and improve upon your Spanish, and I will see you guys in the next one. Nos vemos pronto.